This conference will now be recorded.
Thank you, Carolyn. We have a number of council members here that perhaps, John, maybe we just allow them to introduce themselves. And I know for the benefit of we do have a number of new council members for the benefit of the full council, perhaps a few words from themselves. Would you prefer to do it that way?
That's great, but you should call their name and let them do it that way. That way we won't have this order.
Certainly. Well, starting in order, and this potentially, I don't see her name up, but she could be calling in by phone. Dr. Adrienne Hollis? Not yet, and that's a shame. She is our new council member representing the general public with a very, very strong background in environmental justice, public health. So we will hopefully have the opportunity to present her later. Dr. Hobbs.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Ben Hobbs. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. I teach in engineering at Johns Hopkins. I'm a member of the Environmental Health and Engineering Department, as is Megan also. I'm very proud to say, and I will be also a member of the Governing Council of the O'Connor Sustainable Energy Institute, which does research on the upcoming energy transition.
Thank you. Nicole Cook.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Cook. I'm the Environmental and Agricultural Faculty Legal Specialist at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore campus. I'm one of the legal specialists with the Agriculture Law Education Initiative in Maryland.
Mr. Dernoga.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Tom Dernoga, Prince George's County Council, also member of the Metropolitan Washington Council Government's Air Quality Commission. So I got a lot of political background, but nowhere near the technical background most of you do. So I'll add what I can.
And while everyone knows the Honorable John Quinn, John, if you wanted to.
Oh, just good morning, everyone. This is a great council. Thanks for everybody participating, and it's an interesting meeting and an incredible transition time. So thanks for being here.
Mr. Coombe.
Thanks, Randy. I'm John Coombe with EA Engineering, Science and Technology. I represent the American Academy of Chemical, or the American Institute of Chemical Engineers, excuse me, on the council. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Latshaw.
Hi, Megan Latshaw. I work with Dr. Hobbs at Johns Hopkins. I am on the public health side of things. And on this council, I represent, or I'm a liaison to the Maryland Children's Environmental Health Protection Advisory Council.
And Nicole there.
Hi, good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Hebert, Air Quality Planner for the Baltimore Metropolitan Council. I work on a variety of tasks there for service of the Baltimore Regional Transportation Board, Baltimore's MPO, including transportation conformity analysis for the Long Range Transportation Plan and CMAQ and a whole variety of other tasks. Thank you.
Mr. Wright?
Yes, I've been on the council a number of years and have a long relationship with Mr. Abern, starting back when I was on the city council of Rockville. And we had long sessions about NOx. I run a consulting practice, a sole consulting practice in energy and environment, and I look forward to the leadership of Chris Hoagland.
Dr. Salowich.
Hello, I'm Ross Salowich. I study atmospheric chemistry at the University of Maryland, and this council has been just wonderful. I'm very happy to participate, and I'm actually very happy that we have a remote participation today because I'm calling in from all places from Salina, Kansas, where I'm with a NASA mission studying how the thunderstorms that occur here every year redistribute pollution through the atmosphere.
Dr. Neer?
Good morning. I am Professor Emerita in the School of Medicine at University of Maryland, and my interest was in occupational and environmental. I'm still very much involved in public health.
Janine? Hi, Tom. Did I not?
Hey, Tom.
There you go.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I'm a business representative for Sheet Metal Workers Local Union 100, and I'm representing the Maryland AFL-CIO on this board.
And finally, Todd Chasen.
Last and least, good morning, everyone. Todd Chasen with Gordon Feinblatt, and I'm representing the Maryland Chamber of Commerce. And I just want to quickly say thank you so much to Tad for his leadership, both of this committee over the years, but also his wonderful work on behalf of the state of Maryland and his long tenure with MDE.
And I believe I've covered all the members. I do apologize that my attendees list does scroll as new people come in. So if I happen to overlook someone, please speak up. Okay, John, we are good to go. And you're on mute, John.
Yeah, do you see a need to go beyond that on introductions? I think that's good. Let's jump into the meeting. That'd be my direction. Is that okay?
Yes, we've got 50 attendees, so we'd be here all morning.
All right.
Randy,
and
the
then,
only thing we might want to try to do is maybe somebody could just give a quick call to Adrienne Hollis, because I think she may be struggling trying to get onto our webinar system. So if somebody could just give her a call, that'd be great. She is a new member that we were hoping to have for this meeting. Unfortunately, I think she's having problems connecting. So
yeah, and make sure you emphasize the phone option.
yes,
Of course. Hey, Kelsey, would you be able to handle that?
And then I'm going to suggest we move right to the meeting minutes as people are sitting there waiting for that to transpire. Pull out your meeting minutes. We sent them out ahead of time. If you haven't looked at them, I'll give you 30 seconds to a minute to look at them to refresh your memory. And then I'll ask for a motion after that time to approve the minutes. Well, I'll ask for discussion on the minutes, but in the interim, is there anyone who wants to make a motion to approve the minutes?
I move to approve.
Thank you. May we have a second?
Second.
I have a correction to the minutes.
Oh, great. Who's that?
Robert Wright.
Oh, hi.
At the beginning of page 5, my name is spelled incorrectly. It should read W-R-I-G-H-T, the very top. Page 5.
Thank you, Mr. Wright, for that oversight. I believe I noticed that last night as well.
He's always right.
Right all my life.
Do we have any other comments or concerns on the minutes? We'll do this by assent, and I'll ask all in favor of approving the minutes. Motion. Make a noise. Aye.
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 Anybody Anybody opposed? Thank you very much. So the minutes are complete, and we can jump right into the agenda. Oh, one more thing while I saw the mic is I saw a chat note. If people want to speak on a particular issue, please let us know you want to speak. This is the other 50 that are on. The way we typically operate is we get a presentation from the department, then the council discusses it, then we open it up to speakers from the outside, and then we have a general discussion. So if you're interested in speaking, it really helps us be smooth if you let us know you want to speak and what issue you want to speak on. turn it over back to the MD staff.
Thank you, Mr. Quinn. So for the benefit of the council, we'll be we're bringing back our vehicle emission tampering amendments, and this will be a dual presentation between John Ortiz in our compliance program and myself. As you all may recall, back in March, we had brought forward amendments to our vehicle emission tampering regulations that we had brought before the council last June. Those the original regulations were adopted by the department on February 7th, and they've been in place since then. As you all may recall, there were industry representatives from the auto insurance and wholesale vehicle dealers and auto auction associations that had come forward to the department and brought to our attention some issues that would have affected the way the business operated. So the department did work on some draft regulations to address some of those concerns, but as you may notice from the meeting minutes, some of the issues that the council was bringing to our attention was that the potential for wholesale vehicle dealers as defined could provide an opportunity for retail sales to be passed along, a direct sale to a consumer of a tampered vehicle. So the department did ask for us to go back and make some edits to that. I'll get into some of these details a little further as we go through, but we'll also, just for the benefit of the council and those that attending the call, just give a little bit more of a background on tampering itself. This is just a reminder that all AQCAC meetings, Quality Control Advisory Council meetings, are recorded. We do typically post these webinar sessions on our website.
It's you were a little scratchy, Randy. I don't know if it's you or there's someone doesn't have their audio on mute. So if people could mute when they're not speaking, that would sure help, I'm sure.
Thank you, John. I fear it may be this laptop. I'm hearing this on a number of other calls, so we'll try to lean in and hopefully this helps. I'm going to turn this over now to John Ortiz. John, if you can run us through some of the background and the tampering basics.
Sure. So this is just a refresher and information for the new members who did not see this last time. Over the last few years, Maryland and the EPA have been looking into this issue of vehicles emissions controls being tampered with. The first major case, like in the national news, that brought this to people's attention was the Volkswagen case from a few years ago, where emission controls were tricked to be disabled and vehicles operated without emission controls, leading to significant amounts of pollution. 5 years ago, this issue of emissions being from deleted vehicles wasn't considered a major issue, but more recently, looking into the math and how much emissions comes from a single vehicle with its controls removed, it's considered to be a major problem linked to Maryland's ozone issues. So what is tampering? Basically, there's two general forms. There's removing hardware, and then there's removing software. And removing hardware is removing the exhaust gas recirculation systems, or the diesel particulate filter, or the selective catalytic reduction systems. And these are generally large pieces of a vehicle exhaust pipe, like similar to a catalytic converter, that are removed from the engine and allow the exhaust gases to pass directly out of the vehicle without any control. There's also software tampering, which is done in combination or by itself, where the computer controls are altered to change the way that the engine operates. Like sometimes this is called tuning, where a tuner will connect a laptop or tuning device to the vehicle's diagnostic port, reprogram the vehicle's computer, and this can either allow a vehicle whose controls have been removed to appear that to function normally, removing trouble lights or trouble codes and just changing the way that the engine operates, or it can allow the increase of emissions by directly changing the set points for various functionality of the engine. Okay, next slide, Randy. All right, so how big of a problem is this? And it's the numbers we have, it's significant. So EPA estimates that in the next decade, close to 100,000 tons of excess NOx and 890 tons of PM could be emitted in the mid-Atlantic states due to aftermarket tampering solely of diesel mobile sources. The EPA estimates that 58,000 diesel vehicles in the mid-Atlantic states have had their emissions controls completely removed or deleted in the previous decade. It's a very common issue, and there's as far as we understand, there's a large number of particularly diesel pickup trucks whose emission controls have been removed. And then from 2009 to 2019, Maryland has an estimated 5,900 diesel trucks without pollution controls, leading to approximately 6,000 tons of excess NOx during that period, or 600 tons per year, which is a significant contribution, and 64 tons of PM, 6.4 tons per year during that period. Randy, I'll turn it back to you for the background.
Great. Thank you, John. So as I mentioned before, when last summer, we had presented the initial regulation to the council, updating Maryland's regulations addressing the tampering of motor vehicle emission controls. And the department has had regulations on the books for the prohibition on the tampering of a vehicle and the operation of a tampered vehicle on Maryland roads since the 1980s. However, the action that was brought before the council and adopted on February 7, 2022, expanded Maryland's regulations. So basically, we adopted prohibitions on the manufacture, sale, and installation of these devices as they are designed, as well as the manufacturing of sale of tampered devices in the state. We also required some record-keeping provisions to ensure that air pollution control systems are in operating conditions at the time of sales, and codified the department's rights to inspections and surveillance for determining compliance issues. So as I mentioned previously, we had received comments from the auto insurance and auction associations during our public hearing process, and we had started on a series of amendments that we brought before the council on March 14th to address those comments received. So the council's discussion and recommendation to the department at that time was for us to take a look at the definition that we had previously had for wholesale vehicle dealers and ensure and add clarifying language to ensure that retail transactions could not be completed under the way the current language was written. So working with the regulation, yes. 1 second, please. This is a bit unorthodox of a way we normally present our regulations to the council, but we just wanted to demonstrate to you the way the regulation had looked when we brought it back brought it to you in March, and showing what we had made changes to since that time. So you'll notice, for instance, at the top, the definition of wholesale vehicle dealer has a strike through. That was the way it was originally presented to the council. We had removed that definition and left in a definition for wholesale instead. So in just having our discussions with the auto insurer industries and the auction associations, it was decided that we would more define the action rather than the entity performing such an action. So we provided within the regulation, if we go down further, this series starting here, this regulation does not apply to, this is essentially the exemptions that we're adding into the regulation. It does not apply to vehicles sold at wholesale as the action. And the definition of wholesale now reads, wholesale means a transaction in which a vehicle is purchased for resale by a non-retail purchaser. So it's not going directly to a customer. It's an entity in between, that, like a licensed dealer, for instance, that would need to still ensure that the vehicle has not been tampered with before final sale. So that's the way that section was structured. We had also made amendments to the way we were defining the auction issue of the vehicle. So you'll see the new exemption D, where we cover the offering for sale, or transfer of a motor vehicle by auction, where the auctioneer or facilitating auction is acting on behalf of the seller, secured party, or owner, where the title does not pass to the auctioneer or to the facilitating auction location. And this is important, and the issue with that industry in that these facilitating auctions do not typically hold title to the vehicle, and in those instances, they do not have the opportunity to ensure that tampering of the vehicle has occurred. And again, these transactions, for the most part, are on broader scales, purchased by licensed dealers, and again, have to go through either the Maryland motor vehicle inspection process, or again, through a licensed dealer has to ensure that the vehicle has not been tampered with before sale. And it's important to note that, again, the primary area where the department was seeing the issue, and what we're really focusing on, was the few instances where some dealers were advertising and trying to sell a vehicle that had been tampered with, and even advertising that as a desired feature. So through our compliance advisories and a handful of inspections, the department has largely sort of addressed those issues so far, and we can speak more on that for the council's benefit. And in addition, just ensuring that the vehicles that are blatantly have been tampered with, like as John had mentioned, sometimes the catalytic converter is removed. It's a straight pipe just running out of the back of the truck. Those things are pretty easy to spot and determine that it is a tampered vehicle before transaction or sale occurs with that. Another issue that was brought up as we were working through the process of bringing these amendments back to the council for their review, we had the Maryland Auto Association come forward with some comments to the department. And in particular, one of the primary ones was the looking at providing an exemption for a new motor vehicle, something that's basically just coming straight into the port, coming off of the truck and going straight to the dealer, straight from the manufacturer. And as you see, exemption 1A, the department did agree with this and provided that the regulation does not apply to the offering for sale, or transfer by a dealer, as that term has the meaning stated in the transportation article, section 11-111, annotated code of Maryland, of a new motor vehicle that has never been registered for use. So again, there are federal requirements, regulations out there, as well as other means within the state itself to ensure that a situation like a Volkswagen tampering issue does not occur. So, but this is just so that a dealer does not have to go through the visual inspection process to ensure that a brand new vehicle has all its equipment in place. We just felt that that was redundant, unnecessary. So that is the regulation as proposed. John, I turn it over to you now for we could handle any questions.
If you don't mind, I'm just going to try to narrow through this very quickly. So we've spent a lot of time on this before, and we had some issues and questions, and I think they were dealt with. Can you, in a couple sentences, just say what the major changes you made to this thing, and just do it at a very high level? And then I have another question.
So as the auto insurance and auction industry so eloquently put it, we were, rather than defining the who, we were defining the what. So we're looking more at the exempting the action as opposed to a certain type of industry. That was the primary action that we did. And then we also much more in detail spelled out the auction process, where the auctioneer does not hold title of the vehicle as being an exemption. And picture that as like an eBay of sometimes these things transpire that way. There's not a person actually holding the vehicle.
And those are the two things I want you to say, and it's great and how you summarize that. And now my second question is, what's the feedback you've gotten? Are people happy with this reg? Are there still people that don't want it? Or can you just give us a little bit about the stakeholders and their opinion?
So again, coming out of the March AQCAC, the primary comments and that we were trying to address were those coming in from the auto auction and insurer industry. So we worked very carefully with them for a number of months. And I believe the language that we have presented here today is in agreement with those associations and the department.
Thank you. What a good job.
Now, sorry, Mr. Quinn. Beyond that, we did have comments coming in directly from the Maryland Auto Association. Just as we were about to put our proposal together, so they had their comments were more addressing the new vehicles and the used vehicles that they sell and advertise. So we were in the process of trying to work through some amendments that would address both of their issues, but we're just presenting before the council today the exemption for the new motor vehicles that we had heard from them, and the department defers. We may go back yet another time and try to address some of the other issues as they pertain to the sale of used vehicles through them.
Thank you again. So I open it to the council for other people on the council that have questions.
So if the regulation doesn't apply to wholesalers, and it doesn't apply to dealers, and it doesn't apply to auctioneers, who does it apply to?
So it does apply to dealers in the sense that it does not apply to a new vehicle, a brand new vehicle being sold by a dealer. A used vehicle still has to ensure that the vehicle has not been tampered with, and the record keeping provisions and all of the requirements of the regulation still apply to that entity. The auction industry, again, as it pertains to where the auctioneer does not hold title of such vehicle, that is the exemption is for that. But a licensed dealer or an individual that wishes to sell a vehicle through an auction process, that's that is still beholden to the requirements of the regulation.
Okay, thanks.
And these typically occur in bulk sessions sometimes, as does the wholesale. So we talk about multiple hundreds of vehicles per week that could be transferring that under that.
Randy, this is Sania. I have just a language clarification. You said the auctioneer or the facilitating auction is acting. Shouldn't be the auction facilitator acting? Or this is acceptable language? I mean, it doesn't look correct that the facilitating auction is acting, but and the second thing is following this, you say the owner where the title. It would be clearer to say the vehicle title because anybody can interpret title for anything. So just these two comments that if the facilitating auction is acceptable, it's fine. Just
so these are sometimes can be looked at as terms of art. I know this was some language that the department actually did add in, but I believe that the industry was in agreement with the way it was spelled out. But I will, Mr. Quinn, if it's okay, call upon maybe one of the representatives to confirm or discuss the way that language is written.
Sure, any tool you need is at your disposal.
Okay, so I know we do have a number here. I don't want to call out an individual or
It's someone from the industry that has inside knowledge of why that language is good. If they could speak up, that would be great.
So this is Karen Wright with the National Auto Auction Association, and facilitating auction and facilitating auction location is just terminology in the auction industry that is acceptable.
So they're common terms. They seem a little clumsy to me. Good catch, Dr. Amir. But if that's common and the department is okay with it, my opinion is we can leave it. Other people?
Yeah, I have a question. And this is Robert Wright. We may have covered this at one time, but let me draw a scenario. It says my father dies. He has a car that he's been using for the last 10 years. He dies and I'm going to sell it. Does that apply to me? Because in one sense, I would be selling into the retail space. And would that individual who does that have to attest in some way that the vehicle has all that operating equipment and has never been tampered with? Is that a clear question?
Sure. So right now, as written, the record keeping requirement only applies to a vehicle dealer or business that sells. So as written, I don't believe it would apply to an individual making a private sale.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, this is Nicole Hebert with BMC. I have a question actually about the addition of 1A, and I'm just curious how this would catch an issue such as the Volkswagen situation with new vehicles.
So again, John, would you like to address
Sure.
that?
It would not. Like the new exemption, Volkswagen situation, vehicles were tampered with by the manufacturer. So, and this, by exempting them, it would not. However, the dealers would not have the ability, to our knowledge, to identify a case such as the Volkswagen case, where the tampering occurred in a way that the initial certification process was essentially tricked. I guess the thought was that there are other federal requirements like in place to prevent tampering at the vehicle manufacturer level, and we're trying to focus on making the rule practically enforceable and asking the dealers to identify hidden controls that were installed by the original manufacturer is considered just too high of a bar versus looking under the truck and seeing that it has a straight exhaust pipe. But yes, to answer your question, no, this would not prevent a second recurrence of a Volkswagen-like new vehicle tampering situation.
Okay,
But
thank you.
But that would be covered by federal regulation, wouldn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yes. The federal that would be in significant violation of major federal regulations. Like still, like it wouldn't allow that in any way. It just wouldn't make a dealer liable for that a vehicle that if it was tampered with by the original manufacturer.
Thank you.
Hey, Randy, this is John Coombe. Follow up to Bob Wright's question. Do we know roughly what percentage of vehicle title transfers annually in Maryland are through private sales versus from dealers?
I do not believe we have that information, but that's certainly something that we could look into with the council.
I was just curious. I thought it was a great question, and I wasn't sure if it amounted to a significant fraction or not.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure it does. I'm reasonably sure that it does, having sold a lot of vehicles myself. I have a question, a follow-up on John's question about concerns generally raised by stakeholders. So we received a letter from the Automobile Dealers Association on Friday. I just wanted to ask about the process, and then we wanted to talk about the substance of it, the process about they asked for certain changes, and of course it seems unreasonable to me that MDE would be able to respond quickly, agreeing or not agreeing to anything for a meeting on Monday. In terms of the process, would it be appropriate for us to be discussing these? I understand that Peter Kitzmiller might be here today to discuss that, and he can, of course, speak for themselves. But so first of all, would it be appropriate to discuss this today, even though there have been no changes in response made in response to that? And then second, I think I'd love to hear, ask John about who's done a great job explaining to us about the ways that modification can happen, about the efficacy of emissions testing and inspections, and the reasonableness to expect that a dealer would subject used vehicles that they're selling to those. But let's first the process question. When is the appropriate time to deal with Mr. Kitzmiller's concerns?
So thank you, Dr. Hobbs, and we certainly going to provide the opportunity for Mr. Kitzmiller to comment on the department's tampering regulations. In terms of what the department is proposing today, we are working with Mr. Kitzmiller, and the department was in process of trying to address some regulations amendments that could potentially work with all the comments that he had provided. Bear in mind that as written and what was presented to the department, the comments that are being made are to existing parts of the regulation that are currently in place. They're not part of the proposal for today. So technically, we're not going to be, it's just not part of what is being proposed to the council. So generally, a regulation that is already in place that's not being amended, while it's fair to comment upon it, it's not something that we generally will make changes to, as it's not part of our proposal. So I'm just teeing that up as an initial statement. But it is something that the department is looking at closely and continuing to make determinations upon.
Okay, so yeah, so I understand that this was part of what was implemented in February, right? So it is an existing regulation. Okay. So thank you for addressing the process. We might see something conceivable, something in the future to deal with this. And then I don't know. And then on the substance, I would be interested in hearing what John has to say about. So I'm a dealer, and I've come into possession of this used vehicle that I'm going to resell. Are most of the sort of tampering problems that we're concerned with, both the hardware and the software, that were implemented after the vehicle was new. That is, we're not talking about a VW type situation. Are those likely to be noticed by a physical inspection plus an emissions test, or is there some types of tampering that it would be very difficult for a dealer to find by those means?
Sure. So both. Yeah, yes, there are some types of tampering, to my knowledge, that would be very difficult for a dealer to determine. Like if changes were made solely to the computer system, and you really just, without reprogramming the computer and doing like a deep analysis, it would be extremely difficult to find. Like that being said, like the essence for this role was largely diesel pickup trucks, like which have their pollution controls removed in a large and obvious manner, often a straight pipe through the hood or through the exhaust, blowing black smoke. Like the vast majority of those are quite obvious, like large black pipe, and then if you open the hood, there's been obvious significant modifications to the engine, removing the exhaust gas recirculation system. Like, so it's obvious. You noted the emissions test. This regulation is also partially intended to fill a gap, because at present, diesel vehicles do not need to go to the emissions test process. So this would be a way to ensure that those vehicles don't make it up into the roadways.
Okay, thank you, John. So I guess if I understand in a nutshell, there's the world of possible tampering, and some of which it would be very difficult for a dealer to detect. And so one can understand that a dealer might not want to have liability for every possible way. But on the other hand, there's a large subset of those tamperings which can be picked up by inspections, physical inspections or otherwise, and I would think it'd be very reasonable to ask that those inspections be undertaken. So I guess the question is, what about that subset that it would be very difficult for dealers to detect? Are they on the hook somehow or liable for those? And can the regulation be written in such a way to either carve those out or reasonably treat those? I guess that, and this is not what we're talking about today. This will be talked about later, as was explained about the process. But do you think I'm correctly characterizing the concern and the reason why we might want to have something like this, but perhaps with an out for certain types of modifications that really would be very difficult to detect?
Yeah, yes, thank you.
Sorry, John. Dr. Hab, you're correct, and I believe it would probably be best to let Mr. Kitzmiller speak on behalf of his concerns first, but that is exactly the middle ground, if you will, that the department is trying to work towards, of ensuring that the obvious tampering is certainly something that we don't want to see being possible in those vehicles entering back in the roadway through any mechanism.
Okay, thanks very much for this discussion.
So this is Russ Salowich. So just following on this line and following what Robert Wright had said, I mean, my concern of this regulation, the way it's written, is what you're going to do is force the sale of vehicles that have had these modifications to just simply occur outside of the dealers. So my guess is that there's talk among people who do this, and there's there's probably groups of people who hang out together or whatever, socialize, and so do we know what fraction of these sales today occur through dealers versus private, and do we have a plan for assessing how well this works and whether there simply is a transition away from the dealer lots and onto, sales from the kind of example that Robert Wright had? Although, Robert, that was pretty severe, talking about your father passing away, but okay.
So just in general, as a reminder, all vehicle sales, whether private or they need to go through the Maryland vehicle inspection process. So there is a safety checklist primarily, but as part of that inspection process, the exhaust system as well as emission systems are inspected. So we believe that the more egregious and obvious tampering of the vehicle is a straight pipe catalytic removal will be picked up through that process.
It's another way to say that, if I might interrupt, a properly conducted vehicle safety inspection will bring major emission system changes to light. Is that true?
It should, and that is something that the department will continue to have discussions with the Motor Vehicle Administration to determine that process and the efficiency.
And Randy, if I could just clarify Ross's question. So, and going back to Robert's previous question. So the regulation as written it still prevents anyone, person or dealer, from selling that vehicle. The distinction is that if you are not a dealer, you're not required to keep the records by that you conducted the inspection. So while technically you would still be prohibited from it, you wouldn't be required to keep those records for future inspection by the department.
So the department, and essentially the department will have the ability to monitor Craigslist, eBay's, however sales are advertised.
Right. So that would focus more on the advertise. Like you as an individual would still be prohibited from advertising a vehicle for sale, saying this is a deleted vehicle, you can purchase it, and that, which is the way at present the department has been enforcing this rule. But you just wouldn't be in violation of a rule if no one's going to come knocking on your door asking for the records of the emission control system for a vehicle you sold 2 years ago.
This is Cynthia Wise. I'm the Assistant Attorney General that represents the Maryland Department of the Environment. Good morning, y'all. Also, these are just revisions to the existing regs. The existing regs, there are many portions that remain unchanged, which includes anti-tampering prohibitions against anybody, individual, seller, vehicle, dealer, or whatnot. So those provisions are still in place. These are just amendments to the existing regs.
Great additional information. I was trying to pull that strong statement out a moment ago.
Mr. Chairman, are you ready for a motion?
And no, because I think that we have time to have someone from the industry speak, and I think someone's asked to speak on this. Is that true, Randy?
Yes, we have two individuals that we've noted that wish to speak.
Is that a nice process to hear from them first? But
Absolutely, I agree, Mr. Chairman. Just wanted to make sure that we were moving things along. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm with you on that. All right, go ahead. Randy, will you let us know who asked to speak and then introduce them?
Certainly. First, we can start with Mr. Peter Kitzmiller from the Maryland Auto Association. He was the one who submitted the letter that was sent to council on Friday.
Yes, thanks. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
My name is Peter Kitzmiller. I'm the president of the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association, and we represent 300 franchise new car and truck dealers from across the state of Maryland. And before I get to my comments and concerns, I want to be clear with everyone. Our members have no interest in selling, and there's absolutely no benefit to us to sell vehicles that have been tampered with. And we would like to see regulations. If there's a problem with an increase in tampered vehicles in the stream of commerce, we'd like to try to address that. These are not vehicles we want to sell. My members would prefer not to receive them. I'm going to go a little bit out of order because I think there seems to be some confusion. So Maryland, every vehicle that is sold by a dealer, when somebody comes and trades a vehicle into us, we have to submit that, we have to take that vehicle through the Maryland State Safety Inspection. It is the most extensive safety inspection in the country by far. I think the average amount we spend after doing an inspection to make sure the vehicle passes is about $1,250. And the reason it's so extensive is in Maryland, you don't have an annual inspection. You don't have to get your car inspected every year or every other year. If you keep your car for 12 years, then the car has never been inspected. When the vehicle comes into the dealership, we have to then inspect the vehicle. Same as if you do it privately, you have to take it to a Maryland State Inspection Station. It has to pass. But it is not a cursory, let's look at the tires, let's see if the lights turn on and off. You have to go through that vehicle very extensively. Part of which is you have to look at the emission system. So if a check engine's light is on because the system isn't working correctly, we can't pass that vehicle until we fix it, and so that the light doesn't come on. I noticed before that we broke it up, the tampering into hardware and software. On a hardware situation, if somebody is yanked off the catalytic converter, when we do the Maryland State Safety Inspection, we're not going to pass that vehicle because it's been it doesn't have the equipment that's supposed to have on. We're not going to pass that vehicle. So the hardware piece, I would submit. I don't, at least through a dealership, I don't know how a vehicle would get by if some piece of hardware has been ripped out. My understanding, and that we've done some pretty extensive research on this since we first started talking to the department back in the beginning of April, is that a majority of these vehicles that are tampered with are software. And we do not have the ability as dealers to determine whether a vehicle has a software defeat device in it or not. And one of the and we're being asked, I think the department, I wrote it down, use the term ensure that the emission system is in operating condition. I would say certify, but it doesn't make any difference. That's what we're being asked to do. And the Volkswagen situation was used as an example. Well, my dealers sold thousands of Volkswagens, used Volkswagens that clearly had been tampered with. We did have no ability. We had no knowledge of any of that. We were hurt more as much as anybody in this chain with regards to our reputations. And under these regulations, we'd be liable $25,000 for each one of those vehicles we sell, because it's a used vehicle. We certified that the emission system was operating correctly when it wasn't. We do not have the ability to determine whether or not these defeat devices are in the vehicle. My understanding in talking to our national association is that a vehicle with a software defeat device could go through the Maryland State Emissions Inspection and easily pass. And so we're being asked to certify something that we do not have the ability to detect. We just don't. And so that's our primary concern. And this is something that, again, we've talked about this process a little bit. We've tried to be I will be the first to admit we were not aware of the regulations until April or when it went into effect. Since then, we've been talking back and forth with the department, and we've been as responsive as quickly as we can. Someone mentioned we sent these things on Friday. We sent 3 or 4 other communications back since April, outlining our concerns. This would have a dramatic impact on my members. And I'm listening to I was looking at the data that was presented on how many vehicles. And I think I saw that there was 5,900 vehicles over the last 10 years. It was estimated that's how many Tampa vehicles were operating, with what 600 vehicles a year. New car and truck dealers, between new and used vehicles, we sell about 500 and 550,000, although we're not going to do that this year, vehicles a year. And so, you know, we were happy to work with the department. We don't want these cars coming in, or if they come into the dealership, we don't want to sell them. We're not, a new car dealer cannot afford to sell a vehicle that's been tampered with and then have it come back. That's just something that, you know, and again, I was not aware before this started there was some kind of a market for these vehicles, and I've not seen. I mean, I've talked to my members that they've never even heard of this as being some kind of a market. So, but that's our concern, is there's just no way we can certify that the emission system is working as intended by the manufacturer. You know, and again, if it's some kind of a hardware situation where the catalytic converter is ripped out, we would detect that doing the Maryland State Safety Inspection. And that is, and again,
Mr. Kitzmiller, just to move you to the end, I get your point very strongly that you don't feel it's possible for you to comply because you can't recognize a software change. And I would love to hear MDE's response to that and what their suggestion to handle that.
So in going with, this was something that Mr. Kitzmiller brought to our attention for both the new and used vehicles. The department was in process of developing a set of amendments that were addressing both the new vehicles that is part of this proposed amendments, as well as for the used vehicle portion. So it was something that we were going through a process that we are still working on. I can say that we did have some additional definitions included to attempt to address this issue that we thought was a reasonable process of using the vehicle emission label that is under the hood of all vehicles and ensuring that those components are in place, not so much the electronic portion of that. So we're still having to work on that issue. So the bottom line is that we're still looking for a potential reasonable solution to addressing the issues that Mr. Kitzmiller is.
All right, thanks, Randy. I'm not to jump. I just want to, we can get mirrored in the details of this, and I understand it's important. Tell me about the need for this. So if we had to put this off and say, my inclination on regulations brought to this council are, there's good resources given by the department. They think about it, they interact with stakeholders, and they bring a regulation. And I give the benefit of the doubt to what you bring, and I generally say, let's go with it with tweaks. And that's just the way I think the council has operated generally, and we've been supportive. But this one doesn't feel like we're there yet. Is there any reason we can't just hold this until the next AQCAC meeting and you work this detail out? It doesn't seem like you disagree with them, and they're concerned about liability that they don't need. It's a question. I'm not making a motion. Is that, Randy, something you could think about? Could you react to that?
Yes, we certainly appreciate that, Mr. Quinn. So just to step back just a second, this is something that the department, as we were working through our process, we did have here through our public hearing process, the auto insurance industry and the auction. Those are the type of amendments that we brought back to the council in March. And we've been working through that process, and we certainly understood that it was something that we felt merited an exemption and wanted to work through that process. So, and we were nearly there. We were about to release just that proposal. This is something that came in late in that process, and rather than leave an industry in that gray area limbo of enforcement discretion for an extended period of time, the department just felt it was best to move forward with amendments that were primarily addressing those initial series of amendments that we were trying to work through. And believe me, it is a lot additional work for the department to go through an additional set of amendments. We would prefer to do it all in one fell swoop, but we just didn't want to leave the initial stakeholders that we were working through this process in a gray area for an extended period of time. That's why we're proposing it today.
I see Mr. Colleen wishes to speak.
Thank you. I just have a few questions. Mr. Kitzmiller stated that there was 300, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, 300 dealers that are associated with his organization. Would that include, let's say, small wholesalers on the street corner, or this just major, the big dealers, big companies? Because if this 58,000, tampering is happening, and I believe Mr. Kitzmiller, the major dealers may not want, they don't want to have this type of vehicle on their lot, but someone's doing it. And I'm not trying to point the finger, but I guess the question is, do you cover everyone, or is there a wholesalers association that maybe the stuff is happening with? Just a question. Thank you.
Would you like me to answer that? Yeah, this is Peter Kitzmiller. So we're the Maryland Automobile Dealers Association. We represent franchise new car and truck dealers. Now, obviously, my members sell used cars, but we only represent, and be a member of my association is just new car dealers. So we don't represent strictly used car dealers. There is a used car dealer association. I think it's in Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Delaware have a used car dealer association. I'm not aware of it. I don't know that the wholesale dealers have an association. I'm not aware of how they operate.
Thank you.
This is Mike Johansson. Can I make a couple comments on behalf of the Washington area new dealers? I'll be brief.
Great.
Great. Thank you very much. So the main issue is the comment that a dealer needs to keep a record and state that all air pollution control systems are in place and in operating condition. That is part of the existing regulation that was adopted in February. So yes, that is the concern we raised after the regulation was adopted. We were late to the analysis of it. But one reason, perhaps we were late to the analysis of it, when the regulation was published in COMAR well before the February final enactment, it was described as this proposed action is not more restrictive or stringent than federal requirements. Well, in some degree, anti-tampering is not more restrictive than federal requirements, but there's nothing in federal law that provides that a dealer can't sell a vehicle that's been tampered with. There's nothing in federal law that provides a dealer can't, a dealer must keep a record and certify that systems are in place even if they don't know what they are. So we've been working with MDE, and actually they've been very cooperative since we kind of understood what the regulation meant. At the same time that the auction industry, at the same time that the wholesale industry, at the same time the insurance industry realized the consequence of the regulations, the group of us have been trying to work on this. The reason we're here, and you saw an email late on Friday, but let me assure you, we've been working with the department. In fact, on May 23rd, the department sent us a different revised regulation, different than the one that is in front of you today. And we commented on that because it didn't actually solve the concern. So we appreciate the department. And then they sent out to you all a revised regulation, which we commented on Friday, right? Which only deals with the new vehicles and doesn't deal with the problem. So it's not that we're late to the dance. Now, I will say we agree with the department. We're not here to slow down the fixes for the auction industry. We're not here to slow down the fixes for the insurance industry. But the comment that was made was, well, we really can't enforce it, and we won't enforce the existing reg because we know the auction industry and insurance industry have these problems. They're legitimate, so we don't want to leave them with the specter of enforcement. But the department has said the same thing to us. We know you can't comply with the existing regulation that was adopted in February. so we're not going to enforce it. Well, what we can't comply with is exactly what I said. We cannot certify that all air pollution control systems are in place and in operating condition. So the department's told us, you know, we can't really enforce it against you. Don't worry, we'll fix it. But this gets back to the first question that someone asked. If you exempt the wholesale transactions, you exempt the auction transactions, and then you figure out which things you can and can't exempt with respect to dealers, which we still have to understand. You exempt all private transactions with respect to this statement piece, then what does the reg do? Okay, no state in the country has this provision that says a dealer has to certify that the emission control system is in effect. It seems to me that there's a course of action here to keep in the anti-tampering rules. The individual who's trying to sell a car privately that tampered the vehicle and is trying to sell it, well, he's already broken the law because he tampered the vehicle. Selling it is a second problem, all right? The other thing that we heard, and the department was very honest with us, there's a handful of individuals or dealers, perhaps small dealers, definitely not our members, that are actually advertising, buy this diesel pickup truck and look what we did to it. It'll get, you know, 10 miles to the gallon more because we changed the emission requirement. They're overtly advertising the sale of vehicles that they've tampered with. Well, if you can't find a way to get to them, you're bringing in 500,000 vehicle transactions that dealers handle and creating a legal problem, something we can't certify. If this regulation existed back when the VW problem happened, VW wasn't a new car problem. Those cars were resold every 2 or 3 years, right? For years. So the dealer network, if this existed, every dealer would be liable under that theory for reselling a car that didn't meet manufacturer standards or compliance. So we really ask not to slow anything down, but maybe what needs to be done is take out this whole provision related to certification that systems are in place and operating condition, and also pass the exemptions, because the department tells us they can't enforce it anyway.
Very clear, and I appreciate that input. Back to the council. I'll ask Randy first. Is there someone else that signed up to speak?
I believe it was just Mr. Johansson and Kitzmiller.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to ask the council if anyone is inclined to make a motion.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, this is Todd Chasen on behalf of the committee. I'd like to make a motion that we adopt the regulations as proposed by staff.
Thank you. Anyone wishes to second that motion? Dr. Hobbs, I see your hands up. It's a clumsy thing, and if I call the wrong person, I apologize. You're all really attractive people, but you're very small. So speak and wave your hand, and I'll recognize you. So we have a motion. We have a motion to approve on the table, and it's there. And I told you my disposition earlier. Randy, do you want to have any further reaction to additional changes or future plans?
No, thank you. I certainly appreciate the concerns and comments that we've received from the industry, and it is something that the department will continue to examine. But for the sake of the original amendments and industries, we're proposing this regulation as it stands today.
Okay. Any last thoughts from the council before I move to a vote?
I have a question, I guess, for industry. So is industry expecting or anticipating litigation then on this? If it's
well, our first concern is that my understanding is that if we're going to certify one of these vehicles, which we basically don't have the ability to do, turns out the system has been tampered with, that's a violation, and we're subject to a $25,000 fine. That's our first concern. Litigation would also be would be an issue. And as I said before, we're not interested in retailing these cars. We have no interest in selling these vehicles. But we've tried to be as clear as we can today. We don't have the ability to know that we're doing that. For the, again, I would go back to one other point.
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
There's been a motion and a second, and I'd like to hear a discussion on that and move to a vote before the remainder of this discussion takes place.
I think it's wonderful, and I agree with you totally. Thank you for the help. So I don't hear anything else other than a vote, and we've had the discussion. And we're going to have to do all in favor, and we'll come back if we can't tell the numbers. But let's do it by assent. All in favor, signal aye, and raise their hand too if they can, so they can get the recording done.
Aye.
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 Aye. So are there any opposed?
I oppose.
Okay, thank you. Any abstentions?
I abstain.
And I can't see who that is.
Nicole Abear.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
So do you have that recorded, Randy?
Yes, I believe we have it down. Two opposed, Ms. Nicole Cook and Adrian Hollis, and one abstaining, Nicole Adair, and the rest in favor.
All right, and I think you know that the council's direction is to continue to work with the stakeholders, and if further changes or improvements have to be made, we urge you to continue to work with them. And then we can move on to the next item on the agenda, and I'm going to take a backseat role the rest of the meeting. I have something going on, so I have a distraction, and John Coombe is going to take over at running the meeting. If you're willing, John. You good, John? Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Appreciate your time.
Okay, the next agenda item we have is a presentation on Advanced Clean Cars 2 by Justin Mabry. Justin, are you ready?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, good. Just wait for the presentation. All right, okay, hi, thank you for the opportunity to present today on our upcoming Clean Car Program update. My name is Justin Mabry, and I'm a senior engineer in the Mobile Sources Control Program. I'd like to start with a little background on the Maryland Clean Cars Program, as it's been a couple of years since we've had an update to the regulation. The program was adopted in 2007 after the General Assembly passed the Clean Cars Act of 2007. It adopts California's Advanced Clean Cars Program, formerly known as Low Emission Vehicle or CALEV program, through incorporation by reference. And the program applies to new vehicles, new motor vehicles that are registered in Maryland, and states that in order to be registered, a new vehicle must be certified to California's vehicle emission standards. Next slide, yeah. California is currently in the process of developing regulations to update their vehicle standards to more stringent light-duty standards. The changes impact one regulation, it's COMAR 2611-3402, which are the California regulations that are incorporated by reference. The new standards will build on the previously adopted Advanced Clean Cars 1, ACC 1, which covered model years 2015 through 2025. These vehicles were adopted 10 years ago in 2012, and currently 17 states have adopted all or part of California's vehicle standards, with Pennsylvania and Delaware being the only two states that have not adopted the zero emission vehicle or ZEV component. ACC2 will focus on increasing the ZEV requirement while providing flexibilities for the vehicle manufacturers to meet the program. ACC2 will also include more stringent emission standards for criteria pollutants resulting from internal combustion engines. These more stringent standards are important to help prevent the potential backsliding that could occur in ICE vehicles as a result of more ZEVs in the manufacturer's fleet. The ACC2 regulations will cover model years 2026 through 2035. The standards are not yet set by California. The California Air Resources Board held a public board hearing last Thursday to present their recommendations to the board and to allow public comments on the regulation. A second board hearing in which I believe CARB staff is hoping to have the board approve the final set of regulations is scheduled for August 11th. Next slide. Now, why the tight time frame for adoption for us? Well, Section 177 of the Clean Air Act allows states to adopt California's vehicle emission standards in lieu of the federal standards, so long as they're identical to California's and that they are adopted with at least 2 model years lead time. In order for Maryland, as well as the other 177 states, to meet the 2 model year lead time and capture the first year of the regulation, the department has to adopt ACC2 by January 1st, 2023, which is effectively by the end of this year. Once California has finalized the regulatory language for ACC2, we can begin the process of adopting the regulations. California is aware of this lead time issue for the 177 states, and they're striving to finalize the regulations so that the states have an opportunity to adopt the regulations in time. Some states have already expressed their doubt about attaining this deadline and acknowledge that they might miss the first year of emission benefits resulting from the program. There's also a chance that California will be delayed in their efforts to adopt and have to push back the program another year as well. Next slide. Some program flexibilities that California is putting into the ZEV mandate. CARB has designated ACC2 with or designed it with a much more streamlined credit approach and many flexibilities to help the manufacturers comply with the program's increased ZEV requirement. 3 vehicle types will earn ZEV credits under this program: battery electric vehicles, hydrogen fuel cell vehicles, and plug-in hybrid vehicles with at least 50 miles of certified electric range. There are other requirements for the vehicles to earn credits, such as the battery electrics have to have a range requirement. I think it's 150 miles. There's fast charging requirements for the vehicles, warranty requirement that accounts for battery degradation and other things that will help garner the confidence from the general public that electrified vehicles can and will work for them. Some of the flexibilities I can highlight are the ability to take advantage of early action credits, historical credits from the current ACC1 program, as well as a pooling mechanism to allow credits from one state to meet the requirements in another in case of a credit shortfall in 1 year. There's also a year to make up credit shortfall. If a manufacturer is short, say in 2026, they can use credits generated in 2027 to comply with 2026. There's a similar flexibility for pooling built into ACC1 that the manufacturers have been very supportive of. So I think CARB is looking to extend that into ACC2. Banking credits for use in future years is allowed, as well as trading them between manufacturers, as currently happens with ACC1. One point I'd like to make regarding the ZEV program is that since its inception, no manufacturer has been fined for failure to meet the ZEV program credit requirements in any ZEV state. And many of the manufacturers currently have a large surplus of credits available in their ZEV accounts. California also periodically likes to review its regulations to ensure the program is moving in the direction they envisioned and that the technology and vehicles are where they need to be so that the program can be successful. So yeah, the next steps, once CARB finalizes the regulation, we plan to bring it back to AQCAC for approval this fall. MDE will try to finalize adoption by the end of the year so that we don't miss the first model year of the program. And I think that's about it for the briefing, but if there are any questions, we'll be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Justin. Excellent presentation. Any questions from the council for Justin? Okay, thank you very much, Justin. The next presentation is, I'm sorry, was there a comment?
No, just thank you.
Okay, great. Next presentation is entitled Transparency, Air Toxics, and Fugitive Dust. And Tad Aburn and Kelsey Cisco will be presenting. Who's up first, Tad or Kelsey?
It would be Tad.
Tad's going first. I was having problems getting off my mute button. So thank you, John. And again, I mentioned this earlier in my preview that one of our most critical issues we've got going on right now is environmental justice. And today we're going to give you a preview of 3 new regulations we're going to be putting together over the next few months to start to deal with some of the concerns that we have heard as we've developed community partnerships and worked on environmental justice initiatives across the state. So I'm looking at the timing. I don't have to speak up too much, do I, Randy? I think we're pretty good shape, right?
Yes.
Anyway, next slide. So Kelsey and I are going to be tag teaming on this. As you know, I've mentioned this in the past. Kelsey is one of the up and coming folks in our reg writing group. You're going to be seeing a lot more of her for the next few years. So, so she's going to be helping me with this. We'll transition at some point. So, quick overview of what we're going to talk about. Just what we've been doing in terms of environmental justice and community engagement. A little bit on some of our more sophisticated efforts on environmental justice. A quick overview of the amendments that we're talking about in terms of transparency requirements, updates to our air toxics regulations, and new fugitive dust requirements. And then a question and answer session. And as part of that, if people have, we are providing a little bit of overview of the old air toxics program, but it always leads to more questions. So if people have questions at the end and want to go through some of the basics of how the current air toxics program works, we can do that as well. So next slide, please.
Tad, for the benefit of the council, and would you like to take this moment to introduce Ms. Hollis, who joined us just a few minutes late? She is our new council member.
That would be great. Thank you for reminding me, Randy and John Coombe. We do have a brand new member, and she was not on the beginning, had some issues getting on. So we have Adrienne Hollis. I don't have her CV in front of me, but she is a very highly recommended addition to the council. She has expertise in the area of environmental justice. She also has expertise in many other areas of air pollution control and environmental protection. Randy, is there anything else I ought to mention in my introduction that is part of Ms. Hollis's CV?
Her credentials are extensive. We would be doing a presentation on Ms. Hollis herself, but perhaps we should give her the opportunity to just introduce herself to the council and welcome.
That would be great. Adrienne, would you like to just say a few words of introduction? This is a very good council. We've taken great pride in this council, very interactive, ask hard questions. So I think you're going to fit right in. So Ms. Hollis, would you like to give a quick introduction?
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. So I'm Adrienne Hollis. I'm a founder of Hollis Environmental Consulting. Most recently, I was employed at the Union of Concerned Scientists as the senior climate justice and health scientist. So I'm an environmental toxicologist. I teach at George Washington School of Public Health. I also am an environmental attorney, and I work on issues around environmental justice and have done so for almost 30 years. I focus a lot of my work at the intersection of environmental racism, environmental justice, climate change, and public health. And I'm very happy to be here. Thank you.
Welcome to the council,
Dr.
Adrian.
Hollis.
We look forward to working with you.
Thank you. I apologize for being late also. I'm actually in my mom's hospital room. She was, she's unexpectedly admitted to the hospital here in Alabama. So I'm here with her.
We hope all will be well with her.
Thank you.
So Randy,
Thank you,
next slide. And Dr. Hollis, welcome aboard. You're a huge addition to our council. So again, environmental justice is a very high priority across all of MDE, not just the AIR program, but all of MDE. We are working on we have a strong, robust environmental justice commission we're trying to continue to advance. And we do have MDE-wide initiatives on outreach, compliance, permits, and mapping. We do have a lot going on in the AIR program. A lot of the environmental justice issues somehow come in through the AIR route of exposure. And we have been working in partnerships with many communities since around 2016. And again, some of these efforts have really resulted in some positive projects like diesel cleanup projects. We worked with finding DERA, the Diesel Emission Retrofit Act funding, and worked with communities to actually fund projects that the communities have selected in terms of cleaning up diesel. A huge part has been our port partnership. It's an effort between the port, about 15 communities, MDE, MEA, and MDOT. Again, a real focus around the port, many dollars spent on diesel cleanup and a lot of really good work. There's also a bunch of new efforts that involve building what we now call hyperlocal air monitoring networks. I'll talk about those in a minute, but this is a brand new piece. There's funding for this right now, and having sort of really dense community-based networks is now becoming a very common thing. And we also have started to do something in Maryland, which is using our enforcement authority, our inspection authority, to do a lot of targeted inspections in environmental justice communities. And I'll mention that again later. Next slide, please. Community partnerships, again, since 2016 or 2017, Turner Station, North Point, West Baltimore, Pasadena, about 10 others. Again, these are all built from the bottom up, working with the community leadership, figuring out what the community wants to talk about. We've had multiple meetings with many of these communities. We've actually developed action plans with some of them as well. And again, it's really intended to be a community-driven process, not an MDE top-down driven process, where we're really responding to what the communities feel are the most important issues in their area. And relatively, in many cases, we've had some success, not all the time, but so far, I think it's been a really good process, not only in terms of getting things done in certain communities, but also understanding the needs of the folks that live in these communities. And again, the diesel piece has been a huge push. Almost all of the communities have an issue with lots and lots of diesel trucks, and we've done a lot of work focusing on diesel. So next slide, please. Moving into some of our more sophisticated programs. So this whole new piece on hyperlocal air monitoring initiatives. This is a new concept. A couple years ago, I think we may have talked to you about this evolving technology of low-cost air monitoring sensors. Well, it's now in prime time, and we have these hyperlocal air monitoring networks going up everywhere. And again, we're talking about 20 to 30 monitors in a community. Historically, we have one of our Clean Air Act monitors per county. So we don't have the dense coverage that a lot of folks think we need to have. And this hyperlocal network process is allowing us to actually have that kind of dense coverage to cover a community in a lot of detail. Again, driven by a real evolution or revolution in low-cost sensor technology. And again, some of the folks on the phone, like Dr. Hobbs, have some direct experience with helping drive this process. I'll mention his project in a minute. So again, we have networks that are either in place or under development in Cheverly, Maryland, outside of DC, Baltimore City, Prince George's County, Harford County. St. Mary's County, Curtis Bay, the Lothian community, and there's about 3 or 4 more that are going on right now. Next slide, please. Our partnership in Chevrolet is probably our highest profile effort. It's one we've been working on for over a year. A key part of that partnership has been that we've worked with the University of Maryland's Center for Community Engagement and Environmental Justice. Many of you know Dr. Jacoby Wilson. He is the leader of that group, and he has been a real force in helping us be a really powerful partner in this process. It's been a very, very good process. We weren't in the beginning. It started earlier. We joined in 2020, and our role has been mostly to respond to what the community wants. So we have assisted with educational efforts. We've done a lot of work on the hyperlocal network they have there. We did implement a targeted inspection program, and we now have 3 new enforcement initiatives that are taking place in the Chevrolet area, now being expanded to Curtis Bay. To the right, you can sort of see the network that's in the Chevrolet area. It's actually expanded a little bit from this since this map was drawn. But again, a key partner in this is University of Maryland's Environmental Justice Group, led by Dr. Jacoby Wilson, and some of his staff have been amazingly helpful. So Chevrolet's right outside of DC. I don't know if everybody knows that, right outside of DC. Definitely an interesting area. There's an area called Sheriff Road where there's lots of industrial facilities. There's lots of trucks and roads, and it's a very clear area where there's a lot of cumulative exposure taking place. And so it's also, the monitors we have there are called purple air sensors. They're fine particle monitors. We also have some black carbon monitors, and we've got some VOC monitors there as well. But the heart of their network are these low-cost fine particle monitors, which at first we weren't sure how they were going to work. Now we do think they have a huge value to understanding what's going on in communities. Next slide, please. Our targeted inspection initiative, this has been very interesting. So what we've done is we've taken the sensor data and we've used it in combination with wind information and emissions information to target potential sources that are contributing to what we call hotspots in the community. So we sort of work backwards from the air monitoring data and look to find the sources that may have been contributing to those higher levels that if you look to the bottom right, you can sort of see one of our daily hotspot maps where you can sort of see some of the yellows as to where the hotspots were. And what we do with our inspection program is we target those source areas that are upwind of those hotspots. We do it not only the day after. We started to do this a lot when we have a forecast with wind direction in a certain way, like the Southwest, to do it in advance. So it's been a really interesting, at first we weren't sure we could do this. It took a lot of really creative programming and analysis by some of my data analysts to put this together. But now our data analysts and my enforcement staff work routinely to do these targeted inspections. And when I say inspections, I mean things like the stationary sources. Everybody always thinks about the stationary sources, but we're also targeting things like warehouses, bus terminals, roadways. We actually are trying to link sometimes the high concentrations to major roadways where there's a lot of traffic on a specific day. So there's a really nice report. I think I think it's down at the bottom again. If you ever want to take a look, it goes through how we did all this work, some of our conclusions about what we're finding, and some of the increased enforcement actions that we're continuing with. So we do have 3 initiatives that are now ongoing in Chevrolet and now expanding to Curtis Bay, focused on 1, the targeted inspections, which is primarily stationary sources. Idle reduction. We're actually out, we have partnership with MDOT and the Maryland State Police on making sure that we're enforcing our state idling law. There are just lots and lots of diesel trucks in these communities. And finally, one of the most common complaints we get is fugitive dust. And so we have an initiative trying to do a better job making sure that fugitive dust is well managed in these communities. Next slide, please. Again, I mentioned these in the previous slide, but the diesel cleanup piece is a sort of a separate piece where we're working with the community to see if we can't clean up certain specific pieces of equipment in their community to replace older, dirtier diesel with either electric or cleaner diesel. Illegal idling and tampering are big issues we're dealing with. Fugitive dust, and the targeted inspection program again continues. Next slide, please. Another high-profile project, I mentioned Dr. Hobbs. He's part of this. I know his air monitoring people are the real movers and shakers, but a very extensive network being set up in and around the Baltimore area. Again, led by Hopkins and Yale. We are a collaborator on this project. Their network includes a lot more than fine particles, so it's a really fairly sophisticated effort. Includes many other pollutants, greenhouse gases and NO2 are good examples. And again, this one is a little bit more sophisticated and perhaps moving a little more slowly, but it is going to be a really good network once it's up and running and providing the data that we hope it's going to provide us with. So next slide, please. A brand new effort in Curtis Bay. Many of you may have read about some of the things that have happened in Curtis Bay over the past several months. An explosion at the coal pier and then a fire at an oil processing facility have really raised the interest or the concerns of the residents. And so this effort, even though it was sort of always our second piece, has been put on high gear. This is a really intense effort. We were meeting with the community weekly for a while. We're now meeting every other week. And it has really taken off quickly. Again, we're using our Chevrolet experience as sort of a pilot. But again, it's very community driven. It's really what the community wants. It's not MDE driving the process. It will include enhanced monitoring, similar to Chevrolet's, but perhaps even a little bit more sophisticated. There are new permit issues going on there because of the explosion at the coal pier. So that is of great interest to the residents as well. We've already started to do some of the targeted inspection work, the idle enforcement, and the fugitive dust enforcement. Just recently we started that in Curtis Bay. At some point, that effort is going to be expanded to a multimedia inspection effort because there's more going on in these communities than just air. So this will be our first attempt to do sort of a targeted inspection program with a multimedia sort of flavor to it. Next slide, please. I can't not mention the Port Partnership, even though it's a lot more than just an environmental justice project. It is a huge effort. MDE, MDOT, MEA, the Port, about 15 communities. It's been a real success story. It's been all focused mostly on diesel reduction. By the 2030 timeframe, we're going to have spent about $35 million on cleaning up diesel equipment in and around the port. It's just been a really good success story. We just had a recent press event where we got another couple $1 million from EPA to clean up more diesels in the port. And we had several people from the community actually on the podium with all of our bosses talking about how well this partnership has worked. It's really been a success story. And so we continue to work on this. Again, it's an area that has a lot of communities that are perhaps low income, overburdened communities, and there's just a lot of diesel truck traffic in that area in particular. So next slide, please. Some of the projects, Turner Station, we ended up cleaning up some trash trucks. Curtis Bay, we just finished off some diesel yard trucks. Lots of projects inside the ports. The Dray Truck program has probably been the biggest success story. There's a separate write-up of that on our website. A lot of private sector projects in and around the port, repowering tugs, and there's a whole bunch of other priority projects. A lot of the funding is driven by making sure we get NOx reductions, and we are getting significant NOx reductions from these projects. But the other really important part of this is almost all these projects reduce greenhouse gas emissions as well. So this is a multi-pollutant effort where it's not just the diesel and the NOx, but the greenhouse gas emission reductions are important as well. Next slide, please. Those of you that keep your nose to the grindstone on air issues, there are many opportunities right now. EPA under Justice 40 has announced many, many opportunities to continue to work in partnership with communities. We believe we are positioned very well to take advantage of some of these upcoming opportunities. And again, we're going to continue to push the issues that we've had success with, which is diesel cleanup and electrification, just the partnership building process. This whole issue of citizen science through the hyperlocal networks is going to be an important part of this as well. So it ought to be a great period coming up with a lot of opportunity to do a lot of good work. Next slide, please. So on to the regulations we're getting ready to move forward with. And again, this is an opportunity for the council to provide some early input, because usually we come to you after we've started our stakeholder process. This time we're bringing this to you early. We'd love to get some feedback. A priority, a huge priority. It's got to be one of the highest priorities across MDE. Again, it's very clear that the stuff we're doing with our existing authority, enhanced enforcement, are moving the ball in the right direction. They're good things to do. They're helping. But there's a very clear need for new policies, and this will come out through both regulatory initiatives like we're talking about today. But my guess is there's going to be significant legislation over the next few years in terms of environmental justice. And again, these three regulations address three key concerns, mostly concerns we've been hearing directly from the communities. And just to give you a feel for what we've heard, transparency. You know, being an air guy and having done this for 30 some years, I think permits are something everybody should understand. Well, guess what? People don't understand the permits. And after I took a long, hard look at what our permits actually say, I was probably a little surprised that our permits are not as clear to the lay public as perhaps they need to be. So we're going to be moving forward with requirements. It's not a real stretch. We have requirements that do this. It's just going to be can you go back one, please? Just a transparency requirement. Make it clear. You know, what are you required to do? We'll go through these in a little bit. One of the big issues is cumulative exposure. And we get this concern. We don't just breathe one pollutant at a time. We're breathing a bunch of stuff in these communities. And it's the truth. There's just a lot of stuff down there. And finally, fugitive dust, probably our most common complaint. And we're going to move forward and try to make some enhancements there. Next slide, please.
Just a reminder that these next few slides, Kelsey will be taking.
Yes, I'll hand it off to Kelsey. So I'm going to hand it off to Kelsey. She's going to talk about the transparency stuff, and then she'll hand it back to me for air toxics. So Kelsey.
Oh, she froze up in an inopportune time.
Well, you want me to move ahead to the toxics and come back to transparency?
We can do that.
So we'll come back to the transparency issue in a minute, but one of the key issues that we're dealing with is this issue of cumulative exposure. People in these communities are exposed to many, many different pollutants at the same time. And so one piece of that is the air piece. I'm getting some feedback, don't know why. But
1 second,
cumulative exposure to many people means multimedia exposure, but we're at least going to start to deal with the air piece. We have an air toxics regulation. It was designed to deal with many of these issues, but it does need to be updated to deal with the way the world works in 2022. So next slide, please. COMAR 261115 and 16 dates all the way back to 86. And for those of you that go back with me, one of the first things I worked on was the state air toxics regulation. Basic requirements are that new sources must address any chemical they emit, and they must install what's called best available control technology for toxics. Existing sources focus on a list of pollutants, about 600. It's not a small list. And again, it covers mostly existing sources with Title V or state operating permits. Pretty much the larger sources in the state are covered by the regulation. And then every source must do an ambient impact analysis, which basically is allowing the source to demonstrate that any concentrations of air pollutants off their property do not endanger public health. Next slide, please. That piece is the heart of the air toxics regulation, the ambient impact analysis. So the reg sets up sort of a two-step process, where step one is a relatively easy conservative process, where if the source meets it, they don't have to go into a more detailed analysis. But if they can't, then they need to go into a more detailed analysis, and we'll go through these in a second. And both concepts are pretty simple. Predict the off-site levels, compare those off-site levels to health protective levels. If needed, a more sophisticated case-by-case second-tier analysis or special permit, which is in essence a case-by-case risk assessment, can be done. And it covers both cancer-causing pollutants, carcinogens, and non-cancer-causing pollutants. So again, a relatively simple complex concept. It gets complicated in implementation though. Next slide, please. The screening analysis piece is again pretty straightforward. Again, predicts maximum off-site concentrations to screening levels. We already provide conservative screening dispersion modeling as part of the rule. We do assume a maximum potential exposure, 24 hours a day, 70 years. So it's pretty much regulating the potential of the air to create risk. And again, I call it the porch potato on wheels concept. If you're ever going to get the full dose, you have to literally sit on your front porch and move around to get the maximum concentration all the time. So it's a very conservative process. And again, the screening levels for cancer-causing pollutants are an upper bound of 1 in 100,000 risk, assuming constant exposure for 70 years. And the screening levels for non-carcinogens are based upon worker protection levels with an extra safety factor of 100. Next slide, please. There are more complicated options, and many sources have looked at these. They are a lot of work. There's something called special permits. There's something called second tier analysis. There's several other options as well. It allows for the use of less conservative approaches and more sophisticated modeling. It can also end up in something called an AAL, acceptable ambient level, which is sort of more like a standard. And again, all of these processes have a public involvement part to it. In other words, if you go through the special permit process, you need to have a hearing on what you're doing. So next slide, please. Are they working? I would argue they've worked very well. They worked mostly in the late 80s when they were first implemented, and we had a lot of reductions. I think we had some 50 different compliance plans from different companies. Many of those made dramatic reductions, I would say billions of dollars spent. And they've been a success since then, even though the initial program drove a lot of reductions. What's been interesting is that as the program has evolved, sources have really chosen to use the conservative screening techniques instead of going through the more source-by-source, case-by-case risk assessment type approach. Which has been really interesting. So to a certain extent, the toxics regulation has sort of been a technology forcing program, a process improvement forcing program, sort of a pollution prevention program. So overall, it's been a success story. Does it need to be updated? Yes, it's 20 plus years old. And so that's what we're in the process of doing. Next slide, please. Some of the things we're going to be trying to do, we're going to be looking at having special requirements for areas that are overburdened by air pollution sources, both stationary sources and mobile sources. A good example of this kind of an area is the Curtis Bay area. They've got a lot of stationary sources, they've got a lot of mobile sources. And to do this definition, we're looking at a lot of different factors and different techniques and different tools. We have a whole bunch of environmental justice screening tools that we're looking at. There is a definition for overburdened area in the Climate Solutions Now Act that we're looking at. And simple things, when you talk to the communities, just stuff like the number of sources, the number of stationary sources in the area, the huge density of mobile source emissions, and again, things like truck idling, which are sort of different. They're a little bit non-traditional, but those areas, because of warehouses and businesses and strip malls, there's just a lot of diesel truck traffic. And finally, I like to I've got people that have been walking those roads for 30 years, and there's a lot you can see in 30 years of walking the streets. So just common sense plays into this as well. Next slide, please. We will be strengthening the screening analysis in these overburdened areas. In other words, we're trying to get at the concept that pollutant by pollutant analysis in an area where they're breathing many pollutants at the same time may not be as conservative as we thought it was. And so we're going to be doing this. We've got some ideas we're working through. We do plan to seek input from some of our academic community in Maryland who have thoughts on this. We've already had initial discussions with some folks in the Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School. And so very interested in making sure we get the best information we can in terms of how to strengthen this screening analysis to ensure that multiple exposures in these communities are being looked at and dealt with. This is a tough task. This is not an easy one, but it is something we're going to be trying to do, and we are going to be seeking expert advice from folks that do this for a living, do toxicology and epidemiology and health protection for a living. We're a bunch of engineers. We're practical people. We're planners and engineers. So we're going to be looking for some advice on this one. Next slide, please. We're also looking at a concept that's called continuous emissions improvement. There's been a lot of focus on overburdened communities and the need to make sure that any new sources that move into those communities are dealt with through some kind of a cumulative exposure process. And that's true. I would expect that we've already got work on that taking place throughout our MDE-wide process, and there's likely to be some legislative initiatives on that piece in the future. But if you look really hard at these areas, it's actually the legacy sources that are actually much more important than a brand new source. Brand new source comes in, usually that's our opportunity to have the very, very best technology, very, very best processes, minimum emissions. So dealing with the legacy sources in these areas is really important. And so we're looking at something that builds off of what we see taking place in the corporate world, which is sort of continuous improvement processes going on at many of our major industries, and we're going to build that into a regulatory format where we're over time going to be ratcheting down on the emissions in these sources that are operating in areas that are already overburdened by many, many air pollution sources. Again, is this an easy lift? No, it's not, but it's a concept that's probably long overdue, and we're going to try to figure out how to deal with it. Next slide, please. I might back, Kelsey, are you back on?
Is it working now? Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I'm so sorry. I moved right next to my router now, so let's hope this stays this way. Yes, I apologize, but I will now talk to you all about the new transparency requirements. And so the amendments on the new transparency requirements that are being added are already required through Maryland permits and regs for the most part. It is hit or miss if a source will use less technical language when stating if they're in continuous compliance with all of our air regulation requirements. The department is in the process of reviewing the regulation for all the existing sources with state operating permits or Title V permits and new sources required to get a construction permit. The review is underway in order for sources to more clearly demonstrate compliance to the public, demonstrate how permit conditions ensure continuance compliance, and having an approved community engagement plan if they are a priority source. Next slide, please. So basic requirements for monitoring, reporting, record keeping, and emission statements are already stated in COMAR 261101. And many of the department's regulations already clearly state the requirement for submitting annual emission statements, but along with what we already have in place, we're striving to enhance the public's understanding of permit requirements, source emissions, and the entire process that sources undergo to demonstrate that they are in compliance with our air regulations. This process could be included as part of our sources renewal or permit to construct application. And I also want to make it clear that all permits are currently available to the public for public review. Next slide, thanks. A new requirement we would like to see for sources are plain English summaries. So through summaries of compliance demonstration and permit conditions that are included in permits, the information can be difficult to understand without background on the technical language already used. So a new plain English summary as part of the permit application process would help the communities better understand source requirements and compliance. So the summaries could address frequently asked questions such as what regulations are the source subject to, how does the source demonstrate compliance with the regulatory requirements, and what are the permit conditions that allow for continuous compliance into the future be guaranteed. Next slide, please. So another transparency requirement we would like to include is the addition of community engagement plans. This will ensure communication between sources and the communities that are nearby. There are many different ways we can do this, including voluntary measures, voluntary along with including conditions in the permit to mandatory measures. But for now, our focus on this requirement is on the 400 plus sources with Title V or state operating permits. The department is currently looking at options to enhance collaboration, possibly through these community engagement plans or other types of mechanisms. And then I'll hand it back to Tad. Sorry, I wanted to get through that. So my Wi-Fi.
Great. So you guys will be seeing less of me over the next few years, but you will probably be seeing a lot more of Kelsey over the next few years. So she is definitely something, she's going to be a really important person to the reg writing group. So thank you, Kelsey. So the last piece I'll provide a quick overview on is working to modernize our fugitive dust program. Next slide, please. This is perhaps the most common complaint we get from the folks that live in these communities with many sources. Very common, almost probably over half of our complaints. And if you've ever been down and walked the streets in these areas, you'll realize it's for real. Fugitive dust is a real issue. And again, our inspectors who have been down in these communities for 30 plus years confirm that this is one of the issues that we need to figure out how to deal with. And again, it is a summertime issue mostly, because when it gets hot and dry and there's lots of dust either at a plant or in a warehouse area or on the roads or at a construction site, it kicks up. Now we do have requirements that say you need to manage that. So what we're looking at is enhancing those procedures for managing that dust. And again, it's not just businesses. These are warehouses, these are construction sites, these are roadways. And yes, we do go out and enforce the fugitive dust requirements at a construction site that doesn't have a permit. So it's a program that's on the books, but it does need to be updated. Our current reg is over 30 years old. It's sort of the generic reg that many states have. It sort of says, yeah, you got to use reasonable precautions to control your fugitive dust. And it's been a good program. It's worked very well. That's why many places have watering systems that manage the fugitive dust. And that's, you know, we have all sorts of things that already go on because of these requirements. However, we're not the first to be looking at fugitive dust. Some other areas across the country have been looking at this as an environmental justice and just a dust issue. And so we're now looking at some of those regulations in other areas of the country. And it's going to be a little bit more specific to source categories and the specific requirements in those different types of source categories. Right now, it's sort of generic. Take reasonable precautions. So we're definitely going to be up in the ante on fugitive dust. Next slide, please. And it's important to make sure that we're not, just because we don't have the new regulations, we are doing this. We are already out doing more fugitive dust enforcement than we've ever done. And again, it's been relatively effective. We've worked with sources. We've put out compliance advisories. We've actually had a few notices of violation. But again, Cheverly area was our initial area. It's now being expanded to Curtis Bay. And again, it links a little bit back to the toxics piece where I was talking about cumulative exposure. What we've decided is that, yes, we need some new policies to make sure we're doing cumulative exposure as well as we possibly can. But it doesn't mean that we should not be trying to reduce emissions from the high priority categories that are contributing to that cumulative exposure. And fugitive dust is one of them. Diesel emissions are another one of them. And stationary sources. So we're doing those things already with our existing enforcement authority, but we are going to be refining our rules to make it really clear that we're moving the ball up on fugitive dust, toxics, and transparency. Next slide, please. Oh, I didn't mention this. So the very last bullet is important because what we found is that just by doing some of this education and outreach to sources, both on diesel and fugitive dust, we can actually, without actually having just making sure people know that this is a big issue we're looking at, we are going to be increasing our enforcement on it, and that we actually want them to make sure they're always complying with the state laws on idling and fugitive dust. Just that education piece, we think it's already starting to show some results in areas like Chevrolet. So next slide, please.
That's it.
I think that's it. At this point, we'd love to get some input from AQCAC. This is probably the hottest new area we're working on. Climate change is right up there at the top, but that's not brand new. All this environmental justice stuff is sort of walking into new territory. Everything we're doing in this initiative with new regulations is bottom up. It's driven by what we're hearing from the communities. All of our efforts are community-driven process. Again, this is new territory for us. And so this isn't the end of the process. This is just the beginning of the process. So these just happen to be the first three policy pieces that come out. So with that, I'll open it up. I'd love to get input, and especially on things like, you know, any ideas on who some of the expert folks in Maryland are to get input on in terms of health impacts of cumulative exposure, those types of things. So I'll open it up. Any thoughts or questions, discussion?
Adrian, go ahead.
Yes, I just wanted to say, to acknowledge what a great project this is, and working with Dr. Shakobi Wilson, you know, is a phenomenal activity. I think he's an expert in this area. He and I are you know, very good colleagues, and I think that the results that you have, or the actions that you've already outlined, are impactful, and I think will serve as a model for other state activities. So I just wanted to applaud you on that.
Thank you, Dr. Hollis. Appreciate that. It's great. It's a pleasure having you on the council too. So again, like I said, I find this extremely interesting because this is sort of new territory for me. Yeah, this is really sort of rethinking a problem. Usually we're the government experts. We come in and tell people how to do things. This is very different. This is starting from the bottom up, listening to communities. I can't tell you how many times we've just sat and listened, and sometimes that means we get beat up a little bit. We are the government folks, but it's been really interesting. I find the whole thing sort of it's a different type of program.
It's fantastic. Congratulations. This is just so exciting to see, and I'm excited to be part of it. One of the questions I have for you is the data that you're collecting from the hyperlocal networks. Is that available on the website, or will it be?
Yeah, two things. One is that the Purple Air data, if you just search Purple Air, one of the beauties of the Purple Air system is the company that provides those sensors has done a really good job. They're nice sensors. They also have a data collection and management system, and they also have a communication system. So yes, you can go up onto that the Purple Air site, or you can go onto the Chevrolet site and actually see the data from the sensors. Now, the other thing that we've done, I didn't do the detailed briefing today, but because transparency is such an important issue to these communities, we've also opened up our process of inspections, which is really interesting because my inspectors like to just sort of do their work. They like to be private about it. They like to not be in the spotlight. But what we've done is we've created a system where every single one of our inspections or scans is logged into a system where the public can track that. And then for any site inspection we do on that day, you can link that area inspection to the site, and you can see the site inspection. So now that's a lot of work, because now somebody has to review every one of those site inspections and says, is there anything in here that we wouldn't want to, you know, is it said correctly? So it's a lot of work, but the transparency piece is really important. The purple air data is really easy to look at and understand. One of the big challenges for some of the other data, and Dr. Hobbs can tell you this, is the way you manage the data and the way you get it up on a system for people to look. But that's one of the big challenges for the next few years. I think you're going to see huge innovation in that area over the next few years.
Great, thanks. And then my second question is, you know, say I live in a community and we want to work with you like you're doing with these other communities. Is there a petition process or a prioritization process, or is that something you guys will be thinking about?
Well, you know, first thing is just let us know you're interested in talking to us. So just 2 weeks ago, I was down in the brand new community down in the Sparrows Point area. About 3 weeks ago, we did another community, a third meeting with the Turner Station people. So we're starting this off really simply with just sort of a listening session that's basically the community leadership saying, here's what we'd like to talk about. And then from that, we start to talk about partnership opportunities, things like the diesel cleanup effort and things like the hyperlocal network. And so right now in Sparrows Point, I have the initial discussions. Again, Dr. Wilson from University of Maryland is part of this on building a hyperlocal network down in the Turner Station, Sparrows Point area. So just let us know. I think you've hit on one of the concerns that we as the government people have is right now we're sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul. We're pushing a lot of our resources into environmental justice communities, which means those resources that used to go somewhere else are now focused. And so at some point, we do think that over the next few years, there's going to be a real movement to provide resources to the states to do a much better job with environmental justice. But right now, it's pretty much robbing Peter to pay Paul to get the priority environmental justice work done. At some point, that's going to, we hope, fix itself. But yes, just let us know if you know of a community that wants to talk to us. You know, one of the communities that I had up there on my list is a community called Lothian, and they're a rural community that has some concerns. And so through University of Maryland, ourselves, and the county governments, we're working with them. It's just beginning. And so, you know, and usually the first sessions are pretty easy because usually it's us talking a little bit about air pollution and then letting the community talk about all the concerns they have. And then from that, we have a discussion on partnership. So anyway, just let us know.
Thank you.
I think Dr. Denoga had the next question, and then Bob Wright.
Thank you. I'm not technically a doctor, although I'm a Juris Doctor. I'll be real brief. A couple things. Funding for the systems. I mean, it'd be nice that we might be getting future federal funding. For Cheverly, the county council provided Dr. Wilson with a couple small grants. Unfortunately, not as much as he wanted. I mean, so funding is an issue, and I don't know that the local governments, you know, have the funding to do that. I wanted to comment on the transparency proposals. I recently had MDE. I asked for an MDE hearing on not a concrete batching plant, a rock crusher. And the meeting highlighted, I think, the problems. The public didn't understand what the issues were, where to find the regulations. So it was a nice meeting, technically a hearing, but I'm not sure it was all that functional for the residents that came out and were concerned. So it's good to see that you're working on transparency regulations. I totally applaud that. I kind of had the same question about, you know, how do communities sign up for the monitoring, but maybe a second question is, if you have a community with fugitive dust issues, what's the proper place, contact to go file a complaint or ask for MDE enforcement for fugitive dust.
Tom, thanks a lot. And it's great to have you. Tom's a relatively recent addition to our council. We do go way back, and he's going to be a huge positive piece of this process. So on the funding, I do think originally there was a difficult time finding the funding for this, but over the last 6 months, right now, there's a lot of funding, and I've had, every time I want to put up a hyperlocal network, I found an easy funding source, and Dr. Wilson has been a big part of that. I think earlier it was tougher. On the fugitive dust piece or the idling piece, we do, so we had a public meeting in Cheverly, which we're now maybe going to be doing in Curtis Bay, where part of the effort is to literally enlist the residents to help us do a better job with enforcement. I have about 25 to 30 people. They cover about 10,000 sources across the state, so I can't be everywhere. We can't be everywhere every day all the time. And so we do have a whole piece on how to communicate with MDE. One of the key things, and we now have refrigerator magnets if people want them, is to simply call our hotline and just report on the hotline what you've seen. You can do it anonymously if you want, or if you want a follow-up call that says this is what we did, you can leave your name. But it's real simple. It's just tell us what you're seeing, why you think it may be a problem, and if you can identify where it's coming from, let us know that. Now, we also have 3 different tools on the internet which people can use to report things, everything from fugitive dust to illegal idling. So this effort to work with the communities in terms of helping us, you know, see something, say something kind of stuff is really important. So Tom, I will send you a copy of the Cheverly public meeting that has sort of our spiel on how to report. Okay, and we're happy to do that with other communities as well. We did a similar thing down in North Point. They were very interested in doing a better job, making sure we got the right information. And don't get me wrong, I mean, it's one thing just to report, but part of our enforcement process, if I have a long log of complaints against a situation, that can actually have real meaning down the road in an enforcement case. So it not only is a good thing to do, it helps build the argument that there's something going on here we need to fix. So let me know.
I will. At the county level, the county council level, it's pretty easy for us to reach out to communities and let them know about what's available and connect people with you to help you. I'll turn it over to other folks that have questions. Thanks, Tad.
Okay. And this is Cynthia Wise, the Assistant Attorney General again, and just to toggle on to what Tad just said, it's very true. I am the enforcement person, and recently we settled a very substantial case against a fugitive dust, plant that emits certain fugitive dust, and it was very helpful in getting them into agreeing to corrective actions, the number of citizen complaints that we had and other complaints we had. So the more we have to work with, the better our enforcement cases are. Thank you.
This is Bob had a question also.
Okay, well, I just wanted to say I very much support working at the local level because sometimes you look out and you want to do something and you don't realize that it's fugitive dust or that it's idling diesels or something else. So I think that's very important to know what the major concern of the community is. What I'm missing, and maybe I need to think about it more, is how does this roll up into a larger overall view for Maryland? I'm having to sort of struggle with can you put a piece together that says we're working in the right places, we're working at the local level to gather the information, but is there a story we can tell about how it's helping Maryland overall? That's just a suggestion.
Sure. No, great point, Bob. Appreciate that comment. And so I think that some of the questions that are embedded in your question are some of the tough things we're trying to deal with, which is who are all the overburdened communities, air communities in Maryland? And right now we're working on that. But what we decided we should do is there's a couple clear-cut examples where we know we ought to be doing this work. Curtis Bay is one example. Cheverly Sheriff Road is another example. And so we're getting that going. And the real benefit towards Maryland, let me turn it the other way around, which is that one of the criticisms that we get, us government air regulators, is that you've done a great job putting up your statewide network of air monitors. So you have a really good general picture of the state, and you can use that data to talk about progress. It's clear. If all the monitors are going down, you're getting progress. But the criticism we get is, do you really know what's going on within a community where there may be hot spots, there may be high diesel levels? And the answer to that is, we really have not done a great job with that. It's not driven by our laws. And so this issue of inequitable exposure in certain communities that happen to have lots and lots of sources, I believe it's real. If you've ever walked the streets of Curtis Bay, you would believe it's real. It's a real issue. So the big policy piece behind this is getting at this issue that has perhaps not been dealt with well in the past. And to be honest with you, I think there's some really significant health benefits that will come out of this by just focusing on these areas that happen to have lots and lots of sources in their areas. And so like I said, it's a little bit like walking into new territory. You know, historically, the air program has been, everybody's treated the same, pollutants are pollutants, we're going to make progress, and we've done that. But we've never really focused on these areas where there's just a lot of both stationary sources and mobile sources, and said, is something going on here that we need to be looking at? And my opinion is that there is something we ought to be looking at.
Can I add that also, when you address pollution in these communities, you're addressing it statewide or area-wide, because eventually it will reach other areas. So by addressing the most affected now, you're addressing the issue in its entirety in the long run.
I think that's a great point.
I think Ross Salovich had a comment or a question. Ross?
Great, thank you. So this is a wonderful presentation, and making these ground-based observations is just fantastic. I just want the council to be aware of a fantastic complement to what we're doing here, which will soon be launched. It's the NASA Tempo mission. So the NASA Tempo mission will be making hourly measurements of pollution, including aerosols, due to launch later this year. Perhaps it'll push back in early next year. And, you know, I bring this up because the ability to do this sort of ground-based in situ observations in every affected community is probably, you know, close to zero. And the ability to look at aerosol optical depth from satellite observation throughout the state of Maryland is pretty straightforward for those who know how to work with satellite data, and the ability to ground truth the satellite observations with the type of data that Hopkins is collecting and University of Maryland is collecting in Baltimore and Cheverly and Curtis Bay is very straightforward. So I just want to put a word out there. I put a link in the chat about the Tempo mission. Once Tempo is launched, knock on wood, it launches successfully, this will be a great complement for extending what we're doing on the ground to all of Maryland.
Ross, we are really looking forward for Tempo. You know that. You've heard us talk about it. It's a really, we've used satellite data for a long time, but there's some, you know, satellites pass every once in a while. Tempo is going to give us really good data, not just once a day. It's going to really be a breakthrough in terms of understanding local air pollution. So, but there's also a couple other things that are going on, and I know that Ben Hobbs is tuned into this. I know he's working on it, but the concept of mobile hyperlocal monitoring is also going to be a big deal over the next few years, where some areas have outfitted either mobile cars and trucks, or they've actually put sensors on people as they move around. And that is going to be another area of huge growth and opportunity. We're not doing any of that right now because we don't have the money or the people that technology still evolved. It's actually happened pretty well in some areas, but that's going to be another piece. The satellite data and then the mobile piece is going to be really interesting over the next few years.
Okay, unless there are any other questions or comments, we're nominally at the end of our time. I want to be respectful of everyone's time. Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, hi, this is Nicole Aber. I was curious about the upcoming TAP regulation adjustments and how transportation planning may be involved with those new regulations.
Nicole, we'd be happy to come talk to BMC at a ICG meeting or any other meeting. We'd love to get your guys' thoughts and input on that if you're interested. Now the TAP regulations mostly focus on sources we give permits to, but there are some toxics issues with mobile sources as well. So be happy to come down and talk to you guys.
Great, thank you.
Okay, many thanks to Tad and Kelsey for a great presentation, a great window on coming developments and regulations in Maryland.
Wasn't there somebody who wanted to make a public comment about methane?
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yes, I put it in the chat.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Ruth White with Howard County Climate Action. We've met with other climate groups around the state, trying to track the development of landfill regulations. We're very excited that Chris Hoagland is continuing to work on this, but we would like to see this issue raised at the next meeting in September here. And also that you consider the comments that EIP gave on the cost for local landfills being considerably less than was, I think, the MDE estimate. I think that they came in with an average of 140,000 per landfill. I think that the localities were scared by the initial cost estimate. So we'd like to see these issues raised. I mean, we've been working on, you've been working on them for several years.
Yes, so actually that topic is a relatively high priority as well. We have been continuing to work with stakeholders. We have looked at the information submitted by EIP. We think it's actually very good data, and we're updating our analysis to include that. We'll work with the chair to figure out whether we wanted to add a briefing on this for the next council meeting. We'd be happy to maybe do that. I don't think we'll be fully through our regulatory process by then. I'd be happy to do it. I didn't mention this at the beginning, but the AQCAC agenda is going to get very full very quickly. There's a lot of things coming up. Probably one of the most important ones is some climate change regulation development on buildings. That's going to be really interesting. So we'll work with the chair, and I'm sure we can provide a quick update on where we are with the landfill reg and the timing that we're expecting. So and again, we appreciate all the input we've gotten from your folks, as well as the EIP folks, as well as we've got a lot of input from the county operators as well. So that one is in the works.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ted. Okay, just a note on the coming meetings. The next scheduled meeting for AQCAC is September 12th, and then again in the fourth quarter on December 12th. Randy, is there any more information we need to put out?
That would be it from our part. Thank you very much, John, for helping us facilitate the closing half of the meeting.
You bet. Thanks again to Tad for all his leadership over the years, and prospectively to Chris for his leadership going forward. Thanks to everyone on the council for your participation, and we look forward to seeing you in September. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Have a good one.
Thank you. Take care.